Hello, everybody. Just gonna wait a few minutes for the other guests to get here. We're gonna be talking about the Axumite Empire today. I see Heaven here. Natanai al-Habtab. Arsema, hello, hello, hello. Hello, everybody. We're just waiting on Uncle. Hello, hello. Kame, kame. The hando. Yanit. Okay, well, let's see 1 second. He's unable to join. Let's try again. Hello, Tzion.
Kame.
Kame. Tsubuk.
Lena, dahan deal.
Dahan, dahan.
Ore, sadu madong ko Miss Len.
I don't know what you just said. My Tigrinya is not that good.
No worries, no worries. Yeah, no, sorry for making you wait. Sorry for making you wait.
Oh, no worries. It was only like a minute. Okay. Uncle, how are you?
I can't complain, man. I just got to church right now.
Okay, you just got to see this man. He's doing his thing. Um, Hello everybody. I guess we'll maybe like wait one more minute. We got a decent amount of people. But today, Uncle, we're going to be talking about the Axumite Empire.
Beautiful, beautiful.
So we're just going to be doing like a general overview because there's a lot of stuff. Of course, our history is long.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We'll just wait like one more minute. I guess we got enough people. We can start now. If you guys want to share with people who are interested in that kind of stuff, you can do that. Okay. So to start us off, we're going to talk about the Axumite Empire. The Axumite Empire started from, I'm just looking at my notes over here, don't mind me, from 80 BC to 1000 BC. Could have started earlier. Based on what we know, people kind of say roughly 80 BC. The exact end date is not known. And it's, people have debate, but I just put 1000 BC because it's a nice, 1000 BC. What's wrong with me? 1000 AD. So 1,000 years ago, because that's a nice clean number, but it's contested. Okay. So at the beginning of the Axumite Empire, we don't really have, you know, a lot of knowledge about what was going on at that time, but we know that it was starting to expand in the first 100, 200 years because we have most of our knowledge of the Axumite Empire comes from inscriptions in the first few hundred years. So they would mount stelae and things like that. So stelae are like, the big rocks, and they would write inscriptions on them, and that would tell us about stuff that was going on in the Axumite area. So that's modern day Tigray and Eritrea, and also in the South Arabian kingdoms. So the South Arabian kingdoms would be modern day Yemen, Western Yemen. Is there anything you can tell us about this period, Uncle?
Yeah, so as you said earlier, we don't really know the origins and the end date to the Aksumite period. The conservative numbers say it ended probably somewhere in the 900s. A more larger number would probably be 11th century. So, 10th century or 1080 would be the perfect liberal, I guess, attestation to what had happened. And as you said, we only have inscriptions that we can kind of go off of. So we don't,
Oh, did we?
sorry, so we
No
don't
worries.
really know the origins.
Mm-hmm.
What we can say though is, of course, there are inscriptions in places like you mentioned in Yemen, even southern Saudi Arabia, Sudan, even probably going all the way up to Egypt at different time periods.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, we do know that they were Hellenized, meaning that they had some knowledge of Greek and Greek
Mm-hmm.
philosophy. And we also know that there is a strong Sabian presence in the region. So
Hmm.
to the point that we knew the language. Sabian was a language spoken in the Axumite Empire. To what extent, again, also we don't really know. There's also debates with people saying, were the Sabians just a small colony in certain parts of the country? Were they a dominant group of people? Were they influential? So I think scholars are now coming to the understanding that they were only probably there for a few decades, but
Yeah.
the cultural impact was probably significant. So the Sabaean religion being there, so on and so forth. So
Yeah,
those would be.
exactly. Um, what else do we know? So the Axumite Empire eventually turned into a trading empire. So when you move away from the early period into this sort of like away from like the first, second, third century until we hit roughly around there's an emperor called, and his name is in the way it's written, because we got to remember at this point in time Giz didn't have vowels. It's GDRT. So I just say Gedaret, but I don't know the exact way it should be, spoken or said. I think there's some speculation that it's a Giz name. I don't know if you know. Do you know which emperor I'm talking about?
I
Relative?
I have an understanding of who it is. Like you mentioned, we don't know because it's prior to the Baja Izanas.
Hmm.
But yeah, the traditional reading of his name that I guess scholars kind of just go with is, as you mentioned, Gadar.
Okay.
Um,
But there's an inscription, an important. There's a lot of inscriptions. I'm not going to go over all of them because um, there's a lot of them. But there's an interesting inscription from the period of from the time of Gerat, which is speculated to be roughly like 100ish AD to 200ish AD,
mhm.
right? So there's a where we don't know the exact time, and it goes, after I had commanded the peoples near my country to maintain the peace, I entered valiantly into battle and subdued the following peoples. I fought the Gaze, then the Agame, then the Siguene, and having conquered, I reserved for myself half of their lands and their peoples. The Awa and Singabene and Agabe and Tiama and Adago and Kala, and the Samena people who live beyond the Nile in accessible mountains covered with snow, where tempests and cold are continuous, and the snow so deep that a man sinks up to the knees. I reduced to submission after having crossed the river. Then the Lasin and the Za and Gabala, who inhabit very steep mountains, where hot springs rise and flow, and the Atalmo and the Beja and all the peoples who erect their tents with it. Having defeated the Taigaton, who dwell up to the frontiers of Egypt, I had a road constructed going from the lands of my empire to Egypt. Then I fought the Anin and the Metin, who live on precipitous mountains, as well as the people of Sesi. They took refuge on an inaccessible peak, but I besieged them on all sides and captured them and chose among them young men and women, boys and virgins, and I retained also all their goods. I defeated also the barbarian people of Rauso, who lived by the aromatics trade, in immense plains without water, and the Solate, whom I also defeated, imposing on them the task of guarding the sea lanes. After I had vanquished and conquered in battles wherein I personally took part, all these people so well protected by their impenetrable mountains, I restricted myself to imposing tribute on them and voluntarily returning their lands. But most people submitted of their own free will and paid me tribute. I sent an expedition by sea and land against the peoples living on either side of the Erythraean Sea, that is the Arabitas, meaning Arabs, and the Kinaidokopitas, and after subjugating their kings, I commanded them to pay me tribute and charged them with guaranteeing the security of communications on land and sea. I conducted war from Leokekome to the land of the Sabaeans. I am the first and only of the kings, my predecessors, to have subdued all these peoples by the grace given to me by the mighty god Ares, or Mahrem, who also engendered me, meaning he gave birth to me, or I'm descended from. It is through him that I have submitted to my power all the peoples neighboring my empire, and the east to the land of aromatics, to the west to the land of Ethiopia and the Sasso. Some I fought myself, against others I sent my armies. When I had re-established peace in the world, which is subject to me, I came to Adulis to sacrifice for the safety of those who navigate on the sea, to Zeus, Ares, and Poseidon. So those aren't the actual Greek gods. That's the Greek transliteration of the Axumite gods. After uniting and reassembling my armies, I set up here this throne and consecrated it to Ares in the 27th year of my reign. So a lot going on in there. A bit of a lengthy inscription from Gedaret that tells us lots of really interesting things, that he was fighting all kinds of people around the Axumite Empire. So, actually, Uncle, do you have any commentary for that inscription?
Yeah, so just something a little funny. So that this is one of the earliest attestations to the area or region called Agame.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the Agwa speaking people, the Beja speaking people,
Mm-hmm.
and also when it refers to the Nile, it's actually referring to the Tekeze.
Okay.
So
Okay.
when it's saying this, that it's referring to the Semain Mountains. So once upon a time, even fairly recently, we have I think, if I'm not mistaken, either Nathaniel Pierce or James Bruce spoke about these mountains having snow on it, or
Mm.
in English they would say Ashatia. So
Okay.
when they're referring to this area, and this is obviously kind of going with what's going on today, is that the whole region of what we call Walkayet, Sagade, and Salampi is the region that he's speaking about in this
Mm-hmm.
inscription. So he starts off with the surrounding regions. The Awa region, there's still a contestation of what this is. Some people say it might be Adwa, so
Mm-hmm.
the etymology of Adwa could be Ad Awa,
Yeah,
and
I've
then
heard
it
that as
became,
well.
yeah. So it's definitely a possibility. We don't know, and
Mm-hmm.
it's talking about how our borders at this period, going all the way to towards Egypt in the north,
Mm-hmm.
all the way to Arabia in the south, in the middle, across the Red Sea, and then internally the Sudan and the northern Ethiopia and Eritrea. So it's actually quite, I guess, an old schematic map of what we can call the Axumite territories. So
Yeah.
it's pretty interesting. A lot of the territories we still don't really know, but a good
Mm-hmm.
amount of them we can kind of still see today. So that would be my point on
Yeah.
that.
Exactly. Um, and what that tells us is we're seeing the Axumites. Oh, also, by the way, if anyone has any questions, please put them in the question box. We'll be doing a question and answer period after we do our little presentation. So just put them in the question box, and that's how we'll be answering questions. But yeah, so what we see is exactly like Uncle said, they start expanding outwards in almost every single direction. And that's when we see Axum start to become a traditional empire, a trading empire. And we see them after this start moving seriously towards the Red Sea and getting involved in Southern Arabian affairs, because control and access to the Red Sea is what allows Axumites to control a very important region of the world. Like the Red Sea is incredibly important even right now for trade. Back then, if you were anywhere east, or north of Egypt, or even a little bit west, if you wanted to go by sea to India or China or anywhere and do any sort of trading, you have to go through the Red Sea. So if you were to control both sides, that would give you a very special sort of place within global trade at that time. Okay. So yeah, that inscription is speculated to be written by Gederet. It's not confirmed, but yeah, we do know Gederet was probably the first Axumite king involved in South Arabian affairs, as I was saying. So I'll give a little bit of context just to show you how complicated things were at the time. So we know of 4 kingdoms in what is Western Yemen right now at the time. So Saba, Himyar, Hadramut, and Kataban, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so all these 4 kingdoms were sort of fighting against each other, and Axum was also getting involved. And there's alliances, people moving back and forth. So, and we see some of these, some of what we know is from inscriptions in modern day Yemen. So there's one I'm just going to read real quick. This is a really short one. They agreed together that their war. So this is Saba and Axum when they became allied. They agreed together that their war and their peace should be in unison against anyone that might rise up against them, and that in safety and in security they should be allied together. Okay? So we see Axum, Saba, Hadramut, and Kataban form a large-scale sort of military alliance against Himyar. So this is
Mm-hmm.
roughly the first, 2nd century. Um, After a bit of time passes, the next king of Saba attacks Hadramut with Axum. We don't know why. I'd love to get more information on this one day. But then once the Sabaeans attacked Hadramut and took it over, conquered their capital, They abandoned the alliance. Following that, Himyar and Saba then allied themselves against Axum, and the Axumites lost the battle and seemed to lose any sort of access to the Red Sea at that point, and were expelled from the Himyarite capital, because the Himyarite capital was occupied by all the allied forces at that time. After that, we get into something really interesting. The next period is sort of mysterious. We don't know exactly what was going on. We know there was lots of interaction between Axum and Saudi Arabia. But there's one really important thing before we get to the next stage, which is I forget how to pronounce his name. Was it the gentleman who was the first Axumite emperor, Endubis, to mint coins? So, Uncle, do you want to tell us why minting coins is so important and such a monumental achievement for the Axumite Empire?
Well, one, it shows you the economic performance of the country, right? I mean, at this time, we only have, I think, maybe four superpowers that had the ability to mint coins. So it shows you the sophistication of trade, international trade obviously being one, and then local being another. It shows also the resources that the country may have, the economic resource. Obviously, gold being that of the time. Even till now, the Aksumites are known for their gold work. There are many people that are from Aksum in Saudi Arabia today that are doing gold work, meaning the actual creating like jewelry and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, show like from what I understand, it's to show the economic and military um, independence of the empire. But you can probably see some.
No, that's basically exactly it. It's profitable. It it shows the level, the geopolitical level you're at if you're minting your own coins and not using ones made by other people. It serves also as a small form of propaganda, right?
Yes.
Because you can write on the coins, and we know something. There's a switch in the coins later, and something very important that we see. Very good point, Fabu. All I know is our coins were found in India. They were found in India. Throughout the world. I think also they find foreign coins in Tigray occasionally in places. I think they found some Chinese coins in Debredamo. Is that it?
So I think it is Debredamo. Yeah,
something like that.
Yeah.
And there were some coins, Axumite coins, found all the way in the UK, buried somewhere.
Really?
So, yeah, some scholar was pointing out on Twitter, like they said, it's probably accidental. But he's like, why is it accidental? Why wouldn't it go all the way to the UK at the time? Obviously, this is like probably 1400 1500ish years ago. So so the fact that they started minting coins at that time, and I'm pretty sure they used the what do you call it, the Roman standard. So they were weighted to the Roman standard, so that if you had an Axumite coin, you could go trade easily with the Romans at that time. Okay. After that, we get to the next guy, the next emperor, Izana. Very famous Ethiopian emperor, Axumite emperor. Can you tell us a little bit about Izana, Uncle? What you know?
Okay, so as you mentioned, he's probably the greatest attested Axumite emperor. He's known for several things, but one would be obviously his major achievements in terms of military. Conquering different lands, going to places like Sudan, again back into the Middle East. But he's mostly known for the conversion to Christianity. So the documents that you'll find, for example, Gadla, Abraha wa Atlaha, Awna Salama, so on and so forth, they're very important because it shows the establishment of Christianity as being the state religion. You see contacts with pretty historical people. So, example, Saint Athanasius, who was a big person in Christian theology. You also see the establishment of monasteries. So Awna Salama being one, Abba Yohani being another. Let me see, Izana. Also, something that's quite overlooked is that he's not just a sole emperor; he's a twin emperor. So there's two emperors at the same time.
Yes.
So Izana being one, and then Saizana being the other. The throne of Saizana is actually in present-day Addis Ababa, which a lot of people don't know. Yeah. So
Is it in a museum?
No, it's actually it's a church now. Actually, if
Mm-hmm.
I'm not mistaken, I want to say it's Kachane Medhanyalam. Um, I don't remember the church name, but it was the throne of oh my God, Emperor Atlaha or
Okay.
Saizana. So
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting to show that he would leave and he would actually have his own throne in another part of the country.
Mm-hmm.
So I found that interesting. But again, I mean, there is some debate, but what we do know is that there is a cave and there is a traditional Axumite structure in the area
Mm-hmm.
that does go back to that time period. So that's also quite interesting to say the least.
Yeah,
But
absolutely. I'll just read. Here's another inscription from Izana called, and it's written on something called the Izana stone,
mhm,
because it was written in, I believe, in three languages: in Ge'ez, in Sabaean, and
mhm,
also in Greek, as because as you were saying, they were Hellenized. So
mhm,
what you meant by Hellenized was that the elites spoke Greek because Greek was the lingua franca of the world at the time, in the same way that English is the lingua franca of the world right now. So if you go to Ethiopia now or Tigray, educated people speak English because that's what you need to speak to talk to people around the world. So that's what the Axumite emperors did, exactly, kind of like the Rosetta Stone. So I'm just going to read from the translated inscription right now. The campaign against the Beja, Izanas, king of the Axumites, the Himerites, Redan, the Ethiopians, the Sabaeans, Saleh, Tiamu, the Beja, and Kasu, king of kings, son of the unconquered god Ares. Since the people of the Beja rose up, we sent our brothers Saizana and Adefan to fight them. When these had taken arms against the enemy, they made them submit, and they brought them to us. They brought them to us with their dependents, with 3,100 head of cattle, 6,000 of sheep, and beasts of burden. My brothers gave them meat and wheat to eat, and beer and wine and water to drink, all to their satisfaction, whatever their number. There were 6 chiefs with their peoples, to the number of 4,400, and they received each day 22,000 loaves of wheat and wine for 4 months, until my brothers had brought them to me. And after having given them all means of sustenance and clothed them, we installed these prisoners by force in a place in our lands called Matila. When we commanded them that they give us supplies, and we accorded to each 25,000 head of cattle. In this sign of recognition to he who engendered us, the unconquered Ares, we have raised statues to him, one of gold, one of silver, and 3 others of brass to his glory. And yes, that's it. And then there's a little a part afterwards dedicated to some other Axumite gods. Who is Mahram? Great question. So before Izana converted to Christianity, he was a pagan. He practiced Semitic paganism. Exactly, Mahram, god of war. So whenever he says Ares, it's not actually saying Ares. He means Mahram, god of war. We know before they at that point in time the Axumites worshipped essentially 4 gods. The fourth one kind of fell away. There was Atar, the god of war and love. There was Mahrem, the god of war, who, as we can see, the emperors of Aksum said that they were his seed, they came from him. Meder, the god of earth, and Bahar, the god of
you see.
exactly the sea. Um, so this tells us some interesting things. So this is about his campaign against the Beja, who are a people who are still around today. And I think in Western Eritrea and Eastern Sudan and Southeastern Egypt. So they occupy a decent area today. So we know that he's talking about how he conquered and subdued these people so that they could um, pay him tribute. Someone is asking, are we saying he didn't worship? He was not a worshiper of Christ. No, this was just before. As Uncle was saying, he converted. We know when he converted because the coinage at that time switched from showing the moon god Almaka and a crescent moon to having a cross. So he converted. So that's a really interesting and fun thing to know. I'm not going to read all of his inscriptions because there's a bunch more. We'd be sitting here all day. Um, After that, we see an interesting period where finally the Axumites gain actual control over southern Arabia, right?
Mhm,
So they essentially conquered the Himmer. At this point, the Himmerites had conquered all the other kingdoms and essentially wiped them out, and it was just the Himmerite kingdom. And then the Axumites crossed and conquered the Himmerites. Can you tell us anything about this period, Uncle?
Yeah, so with this period, you see a full conquest of Southern Arabia, meaning like not like earlier where you see certain kingdoms and whatnot, but you see a direct form of leadership. I mean, there's I think there's dams, if I'm not mistaken, and irrigation systems that have inscriptions with Izan. I think Izana's name, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
You all and the similarities is quite deep because like there's certain town names and place names that are in both areas. So can we date it to this time? Probably even earlier. So that's another one, and we see also a large Aksumite presence in that area, in the Himerian area, more so than anywhere else. So that probably means the Aksumite base probably became this region that we're speaking of right now.
Exactly. And I think the guy who conquered it is King Caleb, who's a very famous Ethiopian emperor as well.
Caleb as well, yeah, absolutely. And
Is there anything else you can tell us about Caleb?
yeah, so Caleb, the interesting thing is we can probably date a few things to Caleb.
Mm-hmm.
Caleb obviously being the father of Nugus Gaurameskal. We see the nine saints coming to Tigray at this time. So you get Awan Argawi who built Devra Damo. We get Awan Garima who built Devra Merara. We get Awan Abse, Awan Ikanos, Awan Pentalion. The nine saints as a whole, right? And they established monasteries with throughout the region of Tigray. Um, Most famous obviously is Devra Damo, and what makes Devra Damo and the Nugus Kalib and Nugus Garmaskal very important is that one, there's a proverb in Tigrinya about monasticism in Ethiopia. Uh, no, in Giz actually, it's Zayvie itawalla im aragawi hasawe wuutu. So he
Okay,
who
what
says
does
that
that
he, so he who says he has not been born from Awan Aragawi is a liar.
mean?
Meaning every monastery has its origin in Devra Damo or from the Nine Saints. It's the principal monastery next to Aksum. Aksum St. Mary's Church being the Re'isa Arbarat wa Garamat, meaning the head church and monastery of the entire country. So Aksum essentially became not the church itself, but the city and town itself has became a church or a religious site. And it's been firmly established at this point. Not so much with Abrahatzbaha, but with Nugus Kali and the Nine Saints. Another thing is, some people say it's the swan song of the Aksumite period, meaning the going to the Middle East or back to Yemen and waging war, obviously with the I think his name was Dunawas, if I'm not mistaken, the Jewish king.
Yes,
Yes, in Najran.
exactly.
So in Najran, you had a strong Christian community there, a large Christian community there that was being persecuted by Dunawas, who converted to Judaism. And while this was going on, I think it was a Roman emperor. I forgot his name. I think Constantinus, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Constantine. Yeah.
Yeah. So Nugus Caleb
Oh no,
going
no.
and
At this point, it was Justinian. Yeah, sorry.
Justinian, thank you.
Hmm.
So Justinian asks the Axumites for help. So the Axumites go, and obviously, I kind of help the people of Najran. We call it Nagran. Another reason why this is important because Dusiadid writes this in his Tsoma Dugwa. I mean, in the Metzafa Dugwa.
Hmm.
Basically what was going on, and he calls them the martyrs of Nagran, who were killed by or who were persecuted by the quote unquote evil Jews. What else was there? So yeah, so you get the swan song. You also get Abraha. So Abraha
Hmm.
was a general sent by Nugus Khalid, who defected, married within the system, and proclaimed himself king of the Himyarites and the Sabians and all of this. And then he goes on to start conquering areas and then makes peace with Nugus Khalid. Um, but what he ends up doing, and this is actually written in the Hadiths, I believe, not in the Quran, but in the Hadiths in Islam, where he's riding on this elephant, going all the way to Mecca. So he's
Yes.
conquering place to place, going up to Mecca. And once he gets just outside, in the Hadiths it says birds came shooting balls of fire onto the Aksumites or the Abraha. History tells us there was an outbreak of smallpox, so that was probably what killed a lot of their army. And he didn't actually make it into the city of Mecca, but he
Hmm.
made it just outside because he was on this kind of onslaught of taking over the regions.
Hmm.
So he made it just outside of Mecca,
Hmm.
from what we know.
And I
Uh,
believe he conquered Jeddah, which is the modern day capital
yes,
of Saudi.
yes, exactly. Yeah. So he did conquer Jeddah, and there's a few places I don't exactly remember the names.
Hmm.
It's in Stuart Hay Monroe's book.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I we could probably refer to it later.
Hmm.
But that those are the major things, and also we see with Nugus Khalib, he is the third emperor to retire and become a monk after his kingship.
Hmm.
So after making, getting help from, I think Awan Pentelion, he receives, help and advice, and he says, "I will go and protect the people in Nagran, and when I come back, he gives his crown to, I believe, the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem,
Hmm.
and comes back and becomes a monk in Awan Pentelion monastery." But
Okay.
the money and the manpower and everything of going into Yemen at that time probably was the reason why the Aksumites started to become more weak, since the financial cost of going there and doing all of this probably was over, how would you put it? It was an abuse to the economic power of the Aksumites. I guess
Hmm.
it went above and beyond their means.
Especially considering that what's the name of the guy who rebelled?
Abraha.
Abra. So you're investing all that money into conquering this region, and then your main general who's in charge rebels and starts taking the tribute for himself. So
Mhm.
you invested all of that and didn't get anything out of it, really. Yeah.
Exactly. And the funny thing about that is Abraha marries a person of the area and has a
Hmm.
child who is half Axumite and half Himyarite. Funny
Hmm.
enough, this half Axumite, half Himyarite child uh, isn't respected amongst his siblings that are full Axumite. They get
Hmm.
disrespected, he gets disrespected and whatnot. So he feels this sense of otherness. So what he does is, when he becomes older, goes to Persia and asks for help to oust his father out of position. So they come, they talk.
Oh.
Yeah. So they come, they talk, they have all of these things going on, and then what happens is, in the middle of the night, they literally behead everybody and they kill his father. Not only that, he becomes a nobody. So the Persians now have came and took over everything all the way up to Yemen at this point.
Hmm.
Yeah, so it's funny how things went on, where you get this general who defies his people, meaning the Aqsa Nugus Khalid, but then in turn, his own son turns on him and
Wow, I
then gets
didn't
killed.
know it was his son who called the Persians. I know the Persians came, but
Mhm.
that's amazing. Wow.
Yeah.
And that caused a huge problem for the Axumite Empire because they couldn't stand up against the Persians, and
Mhm.
they couldn't control the trade now in the Red Sea, so they were reduced in power going forward from that point in time.
Exactly.
Um, you touched, Ghazi, you touched on basically everything I wanted to talk about. Is there anything else you can expand on for the nine saints? And can you tell people like what exactly they were and how important they are to Axum and Christianity in our region?
So the nine saints, as I mentioned earlier, were like the quote unquote godfathers of monasticism in Ethiopia. It doesn't
Hmm.
mean that monasticism wasn't necessarily there before them, but they did develop and establish major monasteries in which many of the saints of more central Ethiopia derive their monastic lineage from. So when you become a monk, you have a monastic father, meaning the person who has consecrated you as a monk. So
Okay.
let's say if I go to Abba Garima Monastery, there'll be an abbot there who would be called a komos. So komos would mean the head of a church, the head of a monastery. That's a monk. Not only a monk, he's like busul zala, like he's well studied, well mannered, so on and so forth. So when I go become a monk, I have a monk father, who the person who made me a monk, and then you have a lineage because there's somebody who made him a monk. So people like or saints like Auna Tekla Imanot, Auna Iesus Mo'a, Auna Samuel, Auna Medhani Igzi, Auna Abi Igzi, they all have lineage. So all of these saints, their lineage in terms of monasticism goes to Auna Argawi, from the nine saints. Uh,
Hmm.
so the major things about the nine saints is that they've established monasteries, which were not just monasteries for monasticism, but they're also centers of education. We see the Fidal be developed into what we see it today during Izana and Awana Salama. And you see the Bible being translated in all these monasteries, the Nine Saints monasteries, to which we still have today the Awana Garima Gospels. These are the oldest Gospels that we have in the world, oldest illuminated Gospels, meaning with having pictures and so on and so forth. We date it 1500, over 1500 years ago. Another thing as well is you have things like mathematics, you have things like astronomy, I think astrology or astronomy,
Astrology, yeah.
astrology, yeah.
Well, both
Astrology,
actually. No, yeah.
yeah, both. And there's so many other things as well in these schools of thought. Also, philosophy. Philosophy was a major uh, school in and of itself. So the Kenya system is not just poetry, but it's also philosophy. So
Okay.
you learn how to philosophize. You learn how to practice this wax and gold tradition, right? Of giving like hidden meanings to things. So a lot of these things are being developed. Singing, chanting. The oldest notations that we have are the Saint Yard's Dugwa. So Saint Yard is actually attached to Awan Aragawi and the Nine Saints, especially Awan Aragawi and Awan Garima, in which if you go to the Mitzvah Dugwa, large sections of it are directly given just to the Nine Saints in and of itself. So we see development in the Aksumite culture, language, philosophy, thinking, and the religious sense of things. So the church has been given this more how can I put this, a more structured body and a more of a foundational feeling within the community. Things are
Okay.
obviously in the lingua franca, so on and so forth. So yeah.
Thank you. Okay. And then what do we see next after this? We also see a really interesting, and I think you would know about this. So that's the tie to Christianity that Axum has, right? We know roughly 100 years after the period we were just talking about, it's roughly the 500s. We see a man coming from Mecca to Axum seeking refuge. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, so we have Emperor Illa Sahama.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's Illa Sahama or Illa Sahama.
Okay.
But this is the Aksumite king at the time where the early followers of Islam with the Prophet Muhammad came to the Axumite Emperor for protection. So the Quraysh tribe of the Arabs in Saudi Arabia were persecuting the early Muslims, so they came. Aksum was known as being this place that was very accepting, very protective, very hospitable. So the Prophet Muhammad's nanny actually was an Aksumite.
Oh,
So what we see is a lot of people, in fact, in the Quran are with the Prophet are actually from Aksum. So we see Bilal, for example, who is known
mm-hmm.
to be an Ethiopian. We also see, of course, the nanny of the Prophet. So there's a lot of words in the Quran in and of itself that are of Aksumite Giz origin. So, example, I forgot, the word for chairman originates from Giz. I forgot the name of the word. Um, I think member. I think they use the
Oh,
word
yeah.
member, but it's menver. So the root doesn't occur in Arabic, but it does occur in Giz, which is Navara. So Navara, Yinabber, Yinvar, Yinver, Navir, Navirot, Navari, Navarian. And then as you go down the conjugation, the word Menvar comes up, which becomes chairman. We also see the word Tawheed, Tawhido, so on and so forth. So there are many cognates that we see in the Quran that are actually of Giz origin.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, yeah, so the followers of Islam comes to Aksum, and El Sahama, who is called the Najashi, which would actually be the Nagasi. So Nagasi is another
Yeah.
word for king.
It just
So
means king. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
so they go to just like Pharaoh, right? Like in the Old Testament and in the Quran, there's always this person named Pharaoh and Pharaoh, Pharaoh and Pharaoh, but that's just the title of the
Mm-hmm.
Egyptian emperor. So they go to the Aksumites and they receive protection from them. So it was actually said, do not harm the Ethiopians or the Habasha unless they are on the offensive. So the Aksumites were given this protection from Islam in the religion in and of itself.
Amazing. Okay. You know what? Considering where we are now in terms of time, because I know we only have like an hour, um, I think we'll probably save the second half of the Axumite Empire and some really fun stuff we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about Yodits next time. We might do it today if we have time. Yeah, Muslims believe, some people believe he converted to Islam. I don't think it says that in the Quran, though.
Hmm. Yeah, like in Ethiopia, we don't have this tradition where the king became Muslim,
Mhm.
so we don't say that.
No.
There's nothing explicit in the Quran or in the Hadith that say
Hmm.
anything about his conversion. They do say that the Prophet recited the I think prayers for him outside of him being present, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, in and of itself, it's not set in stone. But we of course like we don't say he was Muslim at all.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, if he was Muslim, the country would have more than likely became Muslim.
Yeah. Exactly. So we're going to switch over to the question and answer period. If you guys have any questions, put them in the question box and we'll get to them. So the first one is someone wanted to know. They said they were in Aksum and they were going down the steps somewhere, and the steps were really big and difficult for them to walk down. And they asked the guide why, and the guide said people were taller back then. And they asked me what did that mean, and I said I don't know. So, Uncle, do you know what they meant by that?
I mean, there are different theories and understandings, right? We hear stories of these giant people.
Okay.
Um, so another thing too is also probably the origins of the people that were there. So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times when you see people in the lowlands, they're more narrower but taller. So
Mm-hmm.
for example, a place like Arwa and Aksum, which is very mountainous, you generally get short people. Um, but then when you go more towards like Adigrat, people are a lot more taller. So it could be something related to that. Like example, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Nugusi Zana's wife is from Woro.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's why his monastery is in Woro till today.
Mm-hmm.
So in the hagiography, I believe it says that yeah, she's from there. So people in Woro and Agame are actually much taller. So it could mean like there's this group of people that were not necessarily from born and raised in Aksum, but probably
Mm-hmm.
raised somewhere else that were taller than the people there. People like us, born and raised in the West, going back home, we're much taller than everyone.
Yeah.
So it could be due to nutrition, it could be due
Mm-hmm.
to environment, so many different things. So I mean,
You never know.
you never know, man. I don't know. I don't know about the Giants, but I've heard this before. So let's see
You
what the
have heard
years
it
that people.
before?
Yeah, people. Yeah, like if you hear what the locals will say, they're like, yeah, they're Giants.
Okay, interesting. Um, will this live be saved? Yeah, yes, we'll save it. Apparently, I'm not that great at saving it. I'll do my best. Next one. Was there any debates around the credibility of the nine saints back then? Agazi D wants to know.
Okay, so with the nine saints, they weren't just nine saints or nine fathers that came. There was
Mm-hmm.
actually an issue going on in Europe, which was the Ecumenical Council. So with Christianity, whatever flavor you want to call it, in the early church, it was one church. And what there would be is that if there was some kind of heretical belief or disagreements, they would have these councils. So there would be local councils, and then there would be ecumenical councils. So with the early church, you have the ecumenical councils, starting with Nicaea, Ephesus, I believe Constantinople. Yeah, Nicaea, Constantinople, Ephesus, then Chalcedon.
Chalcedon. Yeah.
So the Council of Chalcedon, what made it significant was that you get the divide between Oriental and Eastern Orthodox. Eastern Orthodox and Catholicism obviously being the same at that time, and it was due to the conversation of the nature of Christ and how they understood it. There was a heretic called Eutychus that said that Christ's nature was purely divine and the human nature was observed, and so on and so forth. But not to really get into theology, there was issues there. So after that divide, there's persecution on the Oriental Orthodox. So if you're Oriental Orthodox, meaning Egyptian, Ethiopian, Syrian, Indian, Armenian, you're persecuted. So obviously, just like how Muhammad heard and said, "Oh, this is a land of peace and hospitability and all these things." Nine saints and people from Syria and from Egypt knew about this, so they came.
Ah,
So
okay.
So I believe, I don't know if it's Gadla uh, and Elion, but there's a document in which it says hundreds of people came.
Oh,
And when all of these people were tested, they seen that there was like ill-intended people, so on and so forth. And out of these hundreds of people, nine holy people were found. And those holy people, those nine holy people that came genuinely out of persecution and whatnot, were the nine saints. So they were given, a special place in the country. They got to study and live in Aksum for a long period of time under the king. And after studying in Aksum, as Aksum was a great university at this time, meaning for theology and language and whatever. Like people knew Greek, people were translating from Greek to Ge'ez, Hebrew to Ge'ez, so on and so forth. So it wasn't just this small town that we see it today. It was a metropolis. It was big. So Nine Saints obviously studied there for over 10, I think 10 to 15 years, and were commissioned to leave. So they were quite genuine in terms of their religious beliefs and whatnot.
okay. Next question. Um, I was told by someone to ask. Okay, that we already asked that. Showita asked, "Is this the same Beja that exists currently?" Yeah, that's what they think. Yeah, the ones we were talking about previously. Um, Belbib asks, "When did the Axumite Empire morph into the Ethiopian Empire, and what was that process like?" All right. Um, what do you say, Uncle?
Uh, I think the confusion was that the Axumites never referred to themselves as the Ethiopians unless writing in Greek. When they
Yeah,
wrote in Greek, they called themselves Ethiopian. Kind of like when they refer to Mahrem, they would write Aries in Greek, even
exactly.
though they're not the same. And I think another thing was because we colonized the quote unquote Ethiopians or the Sudanese,
Hmm.
or like example, the Ethiopian in Hebrew is Kush.
Yeah.
The Axumites know Kush as Kasu. So as we
Hmm.
heard before earlier, one of the peoples or groups colonized was Kasu. Um, I mean, were the real Ethiopians? It'd be hard to say. Uh, Not
Hmm.
only that, I mean, when we started really referring to ourselves as Ethiopians outside the context of Greek, is also kind of hard to say. But we do know that in writings like Mitzvah Dugwa, we
Hmm.
see Saint Yared calling ourselves Ethiopian.
Okay.
And I think that was more of a way of connecting the Aksumites to a biblical people. So the
Hmm.
Ethiopians, like Ethiopia was just this non-demarcated area. It didn't
Hmm.
mean a given country. It was just, oh, the peoples south of Egypt. How
Yeah.
far south? We don't really know. And then the relationship between the Aksumites and the Sudanese, the Nubians and whatnot, we don't really know. Pre-Aksumite or pre-Damut. So I like to believe that there is a relationship.
Hmm.
And how I do this is I look at the word now in both languages. And obviously, Sudan speaking Arabic, there are traces of their more archaic language in there. So the word for now in Arabic is something else. But the word that they use in Sudan is hasi. Hasi becomes hizi.
Mm.
Hizi becomes hiyi, which becomes hijji in places like Eritrea, Rama, so on and so forth.
Hmm.
So, but the original word being hizi. So hizi and hasi are are very much related, I believe. So
Okay.
I could only imagine the other words. So I mean, again, it's kind of weird. I wouldn't put a thing on it. But what would you say yourself?
Basically, exactly what you said. They kind of like appropriated the name from Kush and also used it as a way of using a word that the rest of the world knew instead, and then over time it became associated with us, and yeah, exactly what you said. Um, let's see, what else is there? Okay, I got a question for you. I've been excited to ask you this question. That's why I was hoping you'd come today. Have you ever heard anything about shadow people or invisible people? If anyone else in the comments has heard anything about shadow people or invisible people, please comment and say yeah, yeah, yes, I have. Or have you ever heard anything like that, Uncle?
I actually have in while I was in Tigray, and it was weird because I mean, like I don't really, you know what I mean, but
I don't
I
believe in it
remember,
either, but
yeah. But what I found funny about it was that I don't know if it was just tricks or whatever, but I would see shadows sometimes by accident at the corner of my eye. So maybe it's something like that. I don't know, but
Hmm.
People, I have heard like invisible people, like, yeah, you don't see them, but they're there.
Hmm.
And so many different like superstitious ideas, right?
Hmm.
So the thing is, these quote unquote black magic guys, they have a stronghold in the paranoia of Habashas. So
Hmm.
so whatever they say, I mean, they can put a lot into it, right? So, but
Yeah.
ultimately, yeah, like I've heard very small things about it, and it's
Hmm.
just that yeah, there are people that can turn invisible. There are people that can turn into hyenas, and then there's
Hmm.
also you'll see shadows on the floor, but nothing actually there.
Oh, yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, so I mean, that's as far as my knowledge of it goes, but I have heard of these things.
Yeah, Showit said something interesting that they leave injera and the mesop for them. I've heard that as well.
Yeah,
So they can come and take it at night.
yeah.
Here's the
I think he's
story
a
I heard.
robber. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
It's just some guy just like, oh, they left the injera again. Yeah, probably. But yeah, invisible people, correct, invisible people. So I just say shadow people because but my mom told me about this. There's these invisible people who live in a different realm. They can go invisible whenever they feel like, and they live in a different realm that's parallel to ours. And then the story behind it is that when Adam and Eve had their children, they had God knows how many children. Like I think the number is 80. And then when God asked Eve to show him all his children, and Eve hid 40 of her most beautiful children because she was scared that God would ask them as a sacrifice. And God found out, and He punished her by making them invisible so no one could see their beauty. And so now they live in like a different area that people can't see, but they can go invisible whenever they choose and make themselves seen. And yeah, that's what I've heard. And also that they go out. I don't know if you've ever heard this. Sometimes people will see fires out in the night and loud noise, but when they go up to it, there's nothing there.
Mhm.
So that's the stuff I've heard. And obviously, this is just our superstition. I'm glad someone else has heard the Mesop thing. If anyone else has heard anything like that, write in the comments. What have you heard about these people? Oh, and what my mom called them was Zarti. But I don't. I think,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But does Zarti have another meaning? I think it does. What would you say Zarti is?
I don't know. Like,
Like, doesn't it
okay,
also
so like,
mean witch?
yeah, it also means like demon or something like that. So,
Okay.
uh, okay, so the story with Awana Yima'ata, one of the nine saints, is that
Mhm.
obviously him being a holy man, he came to the area of Wajarat,
Mhm.
and it wasn't called like this is the cultural or like the religious understanding of the name and where it comes from is that when he came to the area, he seen that there was people worshiping demons or believing in like demons and whatnot. So when he came, he said, "Why Zara? Why Zara?" And that's where you get why Zarat. Zarat meaning more than one,
Mhm.
and then za becoming ja, like in Hizzy, you get Hijji.
Mhm.
Why Zarat? Why Jarat? Why Jarat? So like the word for wazema comes from why zema, why
Okay.
zema, right? So why Jarat comes from why Zarat. So these demons or whatever you want to call them, right? So he came,
Okay.
he kicked them out of the area and then
Mhm.
banished them somewhere else. That's how the story
Okay.
goes.
That's very
So
interesting.
that is very much connected. So Zarti and Zara.
Mhm.
Zarti is like obviously the plural in Tigrinya, but the
Okay.
plural in Giz would be Zarat.
Someone said Deki Adertna. I don't know what that is. Do you know what that is,
Hijratina,
Uncle?
Hijratina. I'm not too sure to be honest.
Oh, they said it multiple times, but yeah, it's interesting. What I always find our superstitions interesting because we're so Christian. There's so little stuff. You know what I mean? Outside of stuff from the Bible.
Mhm.
So I always find that okay. So someone else says I have heard Deki Hederti by my grandmother. So apparently this is a thing other people have heard of.
Okay, Hijrati. Okay, okay.
Oh,
I'm
maybe
not too
that's what
sure,
these
but
people are called. These invisible
yeah,
people.
yeah.
Oh, Deki. Do you see that? Can you see that, Uncle? Deki. They wrote it.
Oh,
Deki
let me see.
Hidertana.
Hijratina, Hijratina. Okay, Hijratina, Hijratina, Hijratina. Okay, I'm not too sure. I haven't heard of it, but I'm
Hmm.
pretty sure that is something
That.
the thing is, a lot of times with things back home, they keep it on this hush hush, so they don't really
Mm,
talk about it openly. Like, oh, let's they hear you. Shh, shh, shh.
yeah,
Or they might
yeah.
secretly kind of, over coffee,
Hmm.
topic might come up.
That's interesting. Someone said Feb. What it said? I think that's more an Eritrean folktale. Feb. Well, I'm not Eritrean. I don't know what you're talking about. Nothing wrong with Eritreans, but and we share lots of culture, so maybe. uh, Zarti is. Someone said I just know Zarti is Tabala I Nebsi.
Well, okay, so somebody who eats spirits
Oh,
or souls, yeah.
oh my God. Okay, soul eaters. Okay. Um, we got maybe like 4 minutes left. Is there anything else you want to tell us about the Axumite Empire around that time from 100 AD to like 600ish AD, Uncle? Is there anything you want to say to cap it off?
Okay, yeah. So just yeah, like you mentioned earlier, there was not a lot that we knew. We only had so much information, but we have inscriptions, thankfully. Somebody said earlier in the comments, there's two places, Mahabara Degwe, which is an important monastery and church, right? It's also
Hmm.
called Sadkan, which is well, it said that Christ has actually went to that area when he went
Hmm.
to Egypt with his mother. Another thing too is Saint Matthew, the apostle, visited the area. So some things that date to the first century you can find there, as well as being a place of Christian thought prior to the conversion of Baja Izanas. So there were some local Christians and also foreigners that were in the area that were there. So we do see that. We also see Jewish enclaves in especially in areas like Shida.
Hmm.
The topic of Walqait actually comes up in some of the inscriptions. I know there's hundreds of inscriptions. We can't go through all of them, but there is one where Izana goes to Walqait, or this place called
Yes, I read.
WLQYT.
Hmm.
So the topic of that area and who does it belong to and blah blah blah. I mean, if you go far back enough, I mean, we can kind of see. Well, it is what it is.
Yeah, it is what it is. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think people can pick up what we're laying
Yeah,
down.
yeah.
Are Buddhas real? I don't think so. What does the church think so, Uncle?
Depends who you ask. Some people will
Really?
say yes. Some people will say, "Oh, it's foolishness."
Oh,
So
okay,
it
wow.
really, yeah. So really, like the church is not even really this unified system. It's a
Hmm.
conglomerate of groups and ideas.
Oh,
So,
okay.
example, with Buddha and Neptaras and so on and so forth. Like, I remember, so my dad would tell me because he grew up with his uncle, and his uncle was actually a monk from one of the monasteries. He actually went on to establish Beit Mufti Agazi. He's one of the
Hmm.
four founders of that school in Adigrat. And he would say, if you believe it, it's real. If you believe it, it can be real. So, I
Hmm.
mean, this is a fallacy of Deborah Bunkwan, or he used to be a fallacy. And he
Hmm.
said, yeah, if you believe this Neptara stuff, it'll be real for you. But ultimately, so showing that like from person to person, place to place, there's different ideas.
Yeah.
So the church doesn't officially endorse anything
Hmm.
outside of its dogmatic teachings, which is
Okay.
obviously the nature of Christ, Trinity, and so on and so forth.
Hmm. Okay. Well, I think that's it. We're close. I got to keep an eye on the time. I don't want to get shunted off like we did the
Yeah,
first one, if you remember. So
yeah,
we got
for
like
sure.
2 minutes left. Thank you very much, everybody, for this. We're going to be back in the next 2 weeks talking about the second half of the Axumite Empire. Uncle, hopefully you'll be there because I want to talk about Yodit, and hopefully,
Yes, yes.
you'll have some commentary about Yodit because I have some interesting stuff. Yeah, it says 25 seconds remaining. Good timing for me. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll be back in 2 weeks. All right.
سلام أخذكم يخون.
Ciao, ciao.
All right, take care.
I just got to figure out how to